Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So just to let everybody in the virtual room know, this will be recorded so we can share it with people who missed out on the webinar today. There'll be an opportunity to provide Q&A through the Q&A function, and also an opportunity for us to get your feedback through a survey that we have prepared. It's very short and it's very important to us that you contribute to that if you can. You can also contact us after this webinar to discuss this further or provide us with any additional questions that you may have. And we are open to facilitating future briefings should the need arise. So the agenda for today is a little bit of an outline of the current context around homelessness in New South Wales, an overview of our sector capacity and capability programme, an overview of the core and cluster programme from the Department of Communities and Justice, and an opportunity for you to ask questions. Thank you. Get the next slide there, Rennie. So I'd like to welcome the Local Government New South Wales President, Councillor Daria Turley, to officially open the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm speaking to you today, the Willacali people of the Barkindji Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in attendance today. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Daria Turley, and I'm the President of Local Government New South Wales, which is the peak body for councils in New South Wales. I'm also a councillor on the Broken Hill City Council. So if you've ever been out to Broken Hill, we are one of the most isolated councils, and certainly would value this seminar today. Look, I was pleased to be invited to speak briefly to you today on this issue that is of such importance to our communities. Domestic and family violence continues to impact far too many people across New South Wales and Australia. And we know that it is one of the leading causes of homelessness for women and children. The housing affordability and homelessness crisis impacting communities across the whole of New South Wales has only added to the pressures on some of our community's most vulnerable members. Next month, we'll be holding our Local Government New South Wales annual conference, where councils will come together to consider and debate our sector's key policy positions for the year ahead. Already, we have received more than 20 motions from councils right across New South Wales, calling for urgent action on housing. Our annual conference of past years have also highlighted the need for more crisis accommodation and local initiatives to combat domestic and family violence. At Local Government New South Wales, we're pleased to contribute to the development of the Local Government Primary Prevention Toolkit for local government. This is available online and which sets out the ways in which councils can contribute to preventing violence in their communities. And so I welcome the New South Wales Government's core and cluster funding announcement, which will provide more than $420 million for housing and specialist support for women and children experiencing domestic and family violence. And so importantly, funding for the new refuges will be available for locations right across New South Wales. We and councils can expect to receive development applications for these refuges, and it's of course important that all proposals comply with local government requirements. So today's session will be helpful for your council in understanding the background to the kinds of applications you may receive. It will also be helpful for you to understand how your council can encourage your local domestic and family violence support services to apply for funding, or even if your council may be able to identify land or assets that could be used for this kind of proposal. Now, look, in finishing, I said I'd be brief. I'm closing with a brief example from Georges River Council in Sydney, where the council offered an empty property to a community organisation for the transformation into a women's crisis accommodation. Until the centre opened in 2020, the council lacked any facility of this kind, and so the new facility meant that women and children who were no longer safe in their own homes could remain in their community with their support networks, near their schools, with teachers that they know, their children know, and the GPs that they trust. As the former mayor said at the opening of the centre, our hope is that this service won't be required because as a society, we wake up to ourselves. But while it is required, we will offer all the support our councils can muster. Look, thank you for joining today. Keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking at proposals. But more importantly, remember that, you know, how we support the applications is important. I certainly look forward to the successful rollout of these critical programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. So I'd like to provide a little bit further to Councillor Turley's context, the current state in New South Wales. So we know that there's a growing number of people in need. The impact of disasters are leaving thousands of people homeless. In 2021, over 70,000 people were supported, and that's actually 30% more than the current specialist homelessness services are funded to support. And of those, we know a further 48% of people who were seeking assistance were turned away because services didn't have capacity to provide accommodation and support to those people at that time. We also know that domestic and family violence is the leading cause of homelessness. At a time when we have increasing numbers of people experiencing homelessness for the first time or experiencing ongoing and recurrent homelessness, our housing supply cannot meet demand. And many of you will be grappling with this in your local government areas. We're aware that there is approximately 50,000 people on the housing waiting list, and reports tell us that the average wait time is 5 to 10 years. With the current investment of social and affordable housing at 2% of all residential dwellings, the actual wait time will be 70 years to meet the current demand. We urgently need investment in social and affordable housing because we cannot solve homelessness without housing. And many of you can influence the levers at local government level to enable that to happen by working closely with state and federal government. We know that 30% of renters are in rental stress across the state, and unfortunately, affordable rentals are just not available. And there's less than 1% of vacancy rate available for people on low incomes, and actually 0.01% available for people with a disability support need. In response to this and more, the government has invested over $400 million in the core and cluster programme. And this programme, Matthew Sander, my colleague from Department of Communities and Justice, will provide more detail on, is designed to provide crisis accommodation to people experiencing domestic and family violence in a supported and wraparound support model. At Homelessness New South Wales, we've also received funding along with our partners in DV New South Wales and the Aboriginal Community Housing Industry Association, ACCOs, to work together to deliver a programme of engagement and sector capacity building to support the success of this procurement model. So this programme of support from our end is designed to enable the sector to collaborate, to work together, to submit bids for this tender process to ensure that that's as successful as possible. And this support programme will prioritise Aboriginal community control services, regional projects, and small to medium-sized specialist organisations to ensure that they can fully participate in the core and cluster programme. So the main levers that we're using to provide sector support is firstly through a grants programme. So we have a pot of up to $600,000 available to support small to medium-sized organisations and Aboriginal community controlled organisations for grants of up to 20k to help them submit their tender bids. So that might look like services or consultancy fees, and they can also be funded retrospectively for that to help them to actually put the bids together in time to meet the deadlines. We're doing sector engagement with specialist homelessness services, domestic and family violence services, and Aboriginal community housing providers. And that looks like how to form partnerships, consortium models, working with local government, like the session that we're running today. We're doing consultation with the sector, and we're heading out to the regions across New South Wales to actually hold town hall forums to provide support on the ground and understand what individual localized needs are required across the different districts, so that we can form those partnerships to enable people to participate in the process. We're also being responsive through feedback from our sector colleagues and running workshops and developing resources on anything they may need. And so we'd like to extend that to our colleagues in local government. If after today you've identified that there's a significant gap or that we've missed something that we're not aware of, we'd welcome your opportunity to partner with us and provide feedback to us so that we can actually leverage all the knowledge available to make this a success. So what are the benefits for local government in participating in this model and being involved in this programme? So there's an opportunity, as the President outlined beautifully, for local governments to provide assets, land and support to meet sector, specialist homelessness services, DV services and community housing providers, to actually share those assets, to provide that land, to help them to put in bids through this process. There's also the obvious opportunity for local government to facilitate support and accommodation for the most vulnerable residents, which I know will meet many of the goals across your strategic and community plans. The opportunity to have a successful core and cluster model or hub and home model in your local government area also increases the safety for residents and increases the opportunities for people fleeing domestic and family violence. Thank you. So what I'd like to do now is, we've talked about a little bit about the challenge. We've heard about the benefits to local government for why this is important for you. And now I'd like to please hand over to my colleague, Matthew Sander, who is the director and lead on this programme at the Department of Communities and Justice, to talk you through what the programme is and some of the design guidelines that will be most of interest to the planners and decision makers on the webinar. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Trina, and hello to everyone. Before I start, I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Gadigal land today and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge any Aboriginal people joining us on the call today. So thank you, Trina, for the introduction, and thank you, Councillor Tully, for your introduction as well. You touched on a lot of the points that I was hoping to flag in this presentation, so I think that was a great introduction and really hit on the importance of, where we at the Department of Communities and Justice are coming from with this program, the opportunity it presents, and how it might align with some of the goals and opportunities for local government as well. I'd also like to acknowledge my my Homelessness New South Wales, ACCO and DV New South Wales colleagues. As Trina mentioned, we have provided funding to all three of those organisations to help us support the successful implementation of this program. This is a really critical program, and obviously has a lot of potential impacts across a very diverse range of services and stakeholders, including a lot of people on this call today. So we're really excited to be able to work in partnership with service providers, and also looking forward to the opportunity for partnerships with local government as well. So just before I get started, I'll just provide a bit of an overview of the Core and Cluster program. And then, as Trina mentioned, I'm going to go through a little bit of what a Core and Cluster facility or proposal might look like, to give a bit of an idea of the sorts of things we're looking to procure through this program, and give a bit of an overview of the sorts of proposals that might be coming local councils' ways for assessment. Obviously, every proposal will look different for this program, but I'm trying to provide a bit of an overview of the sorts of guidelines we've provided to service providers who are bidding for funding under this program. So in terms of background, on the 19th of October 2021, the New South Wales government announced an investment of $484.3 million for housing and specialist supports for women and children experiencing domestic and family violence. My understanding is it's the single biggest investment in addressing domestic and family violence in the New South Wales' history. The funding includes $426.6 million to expand core and cluster to deliver and operate new women's crisis refuges that will support up to an additional 2,900 women and children escaping domestic and family violence. We've said the words core and cluster a lot. That might not mean a whole lot for some of the people on this call. Don't worry, I'm going to go through what core and cluster means. But I will also be clear that we're also looking at some of our communications around this program and how we might reduce some of the use of jargon with this program, particularly when we'll be communicating with victim survivors and potential clients of this program as well. But I will, core and cluster is a sort of a bit of a technical phrase that has a definition, and I'll go through that. But just in case anyone's wondering where, it's $426.6 million to expand core and cluster. For anyone interested in what the remainder out of the $484 million is going towards, the funding package also included $52.5 million over 4 years. That's gone towards the Community Housing Innovation Fund for partnerships with the community housing sector to provide approximately 200 social and affordable homes for women experiencing domestic and family violence. And it also includes $5.2 million over 4 years to trial in 2 areas, one in regional New South Wales and one in Greater Sydney, to provide dedicated supports for up to 3,200 accompanied children and young people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, with a focus on those impacted by domestic and family violence. So I'm not going to go through those 2 items today. I'm going to focus on the investment in core and cluster, but for anyone interested, that's what the remainder of the funding has gone towards. So what is core and cluster? Core and cluster is a crisis refuge model that allows for independent living and privacy while also providing access to supports. So under the core and cluster model, it's really about moving away from a sort of shared house environment to having fully independent living quarters with private bathroom and kitchen facilities. And it combines the services and supports of a traditional refuge with independent living facilities of transitional accommodation. When we talk about crisis accommodation, we're usually talking about sort of short-term crisis accommodation, approximately for 3 months in duration, but it depends on the individual family needs, and there can be obviously longer stays in crisis accommodation in different circumstances, but it's generally sort of considered around a sort of 3-month accommodation form. So what does core and cluster actually refer to? So under this model, the cluster is self-contained accommodation units, which are located close to communal facilities, which is the core. And the core usually surrounds a center offering communal and central spaces, which provide access to services such as counseling, legal assistance, education, employment support, and conferencing amenities. This approach allows residents to access much needed support and assistance, while also having personal space and necessary amenities to effectively deal with personal issues and trauma and be able to heal and thrive. For families, self-contained accommodation also allows mothers to care for their children with privacy and as little disruption to routine as possible. And this is a really critical component of the program as well. The intention is for the delivery to be locally led and target locations of greatest unmet need, including regional communities. And thanks for that. So just going to the next slide there. So how we're procuring this program, the Department of Communities of Justice is the lead agency responsible for delivery of the investment in the core and cluster program. And under this approach, we are seeking to procure new refuges under the core and cluster model. So just back one slide for a moment. New refuges under the core and cluster model over 3 tranches, and with each tranche comprising of 2 stages, which is in line with New South Wales government procurement guidelines. So for each tranche, there's an expression of interest followed by a request for tender. And for tranches 2 and 3, we're actually putting out 2 separate concurrent processes, one for targeted Aboriginal-led providers and one that has a broader eligibility, so it's open to all eligible organisations. I should note that DCJ has not predetermined the number of core and cluster facilities to be established or the amount of funding to be allocated to each tranche of procurement. So the exact number of refuges that will be delivered through this will be determined by the procurement process. So Tranche 1, which is now closed, was for ready-to-go projects that could be asset delivered between July and December 2022, with services to commence on completion of construction. So we haven't announced the outcomes of that, but we have been through both the expression of interest and a request for tender process for Tranche 1. Tranche 2 is for projects for implementation or further development from July 2023. It's looking at like a delivery window sort of between July 2023 and 30 June 2024, although there's a little bit of, it's a bit open for projects that need a bit longer delivery time than that. Expressions of interest for tranche 2 have closed with the request for tenders opening today and due to close on the 24th of October 2022. It's indicative. And then tranche 3 will be for projects suitable for implementation or further development from December 2023. And we're expecting expressions of interest for tranche 3 to open in early 2023. Let's jump onto the next slide there. So as part of submitting a proposal through the expression of interest or request for tender process, proponents are required to demonstrate their ability to deliver both the asset and service delivery components within the required timeframes for each tranche. So what we're looking at is proponents that can provide an indication of their ability to deliver in the time frame, and that can include access to existing asset or land, floor plans or designs where applicable, negotiations for purchase or lease of property asset, copies of relevant approvals if they're up to that stage at this point. What we are providing funding for under this program is both the asset and service. So for proponents who are seeking to bid for a core and cluster funding, we're looking at services that are capable of delivering the land, the asset, the maintenance program, and the service. And so it's open to consortium bids, including partnerships between specialist homelessness services or services seeking accreditation as specialist homelessness services, and community housing providers or services seeking accreditation as community housing providers, or services that can deliver all of it, or things like that. So it's open to different delivery models. Jump onto the next slide. So with regards to what constitutes a new core and cluster facility, so this funding is for new refuges, and as I've mentioned, we've got so I've just lost my place here. New facility is service one that meets the requirements that is not currently being funded for DFE crisis accommodation. Facilities that include one or more of the following can operate under the core and cluster program on land owned, leased or purchased or proposed for purchase, on assets that require construction to be developed, or on existing assets that require further modification. Just on the next slide there. So DCJ will also consider proposals for the purchase of land and or existing assets, or for new or extension of leases. Respondents with these proposals are required to provide assurance that deliverable timeframes can be met. This includes providing all the information they can about the status of negotiations with the property or asset owner, including any agreements and principles, together with any other relevant approvals. So that's a bit of a technical sort of overview of the procurement process and what we're looking for in terms of proposals. I wanted to jump in the next slides to give you a bit of an information about what we're looking at in terms of an actual core and cluster proposal, and give you an idea of the sorts of what these facilities might look like and the sorts of services that we would be seeking to fund. So the delivery model for the new core and cluster facilities is depicted on this slide. I emphasize that proposals must address all four of these components for responses to be eligible. The land provision component requires responses to detail what asset land is proposed to be used for the core and cluster facility. There's no specific land ownership or provision structure set by DCJ. The focus is on long-term arrangements of ideally 15 years or more. The second component is asset delivery, with proposals detailing what modifications to the proposed facility are necessary, or it could include, site plans if it's a new build. If no modifications required, proposals can detail the extent to which the asset specifications and considerations are addressed. And the service delivery component seeks details on the wraparound services women and children and families can access on the site, and or close to their living quarters, and how they can stay connected to the community. And this includes details on things like integration with other local services and other community services that might exist. And there's an asset maintenance component as well. And as I mentioned, under this program, we're providing funding for both the capital funding to establish the core and cluster facility, including funding to build, purchase, or refurbish a facility, and funding for service delivery to operate the crisis accommodation facility and deliver specialist DFE support services on site. So as mentioned, I'm going to provide an overview of what is meant by core and cluster. The cluster refers to the self-contained accommodation located next to a core for service support. So the specifications that we've put out in the request for tender align with the domestic violence crisis accommodation functional design brief, which was developed by Land and Housing Corporation with the work and support of the New South Wales government architect. So this proposal is included in the expression of interest and request for tender information, this functional design brief, I should say. And what it does is it sets out what a sort of ideal core and cluster facility looks like. And when we're assessing proposals, what we're looking for is alignment with these specifications. Obviously, every proposal will have to go through whatever local planning requirements are needed, but we have provided this design brief to provide that high level detail of the sorts of facilities that we're looking to fund through this program. So if you just jump onto the next slide. And I've seen a comment about circulating the slides. Yes, we can look to circulate these slides as part of after this meeting, because I don't expect everyone to be furiously jotting down all these tiny words on the screen. But this slide provides a summary of the asset design considerations. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but DCJ requires proposals to detail to the extent to which these have been considered and addressed. And what we're really looking at is things like safety and security of people on site, the privacy measures, the access to common spaces, the extent to which the core building provides adequate space and meets the requirements, the consultation with the local community that might be developed as part of the proposal, whether or not it's friendly for animals and pets, parking that's available, and compliance with relevant planning and building regulations. And Lisa, yes, we'll also, the functional design brief is available on the DCJ website, on the core and cluster website, but we'll provide a link. I'm happy to provide a link to that as after this presentation as well. Just jump onto the next slide there. So these are just some of the example drawings that we've pulled out of that functional design brief that, as I mentioned, was developed by the New South Wales government architect and the Land and Housing Corporation. Understanding was this was developed after extensive consultation. I didn't lead that work itself, but I've been assured there was quite extensive consultation around this. So just going through a few of the kind of examples of a core and cluster design. So you'll see in this one, there are 6 separate independent living units that surround a communal garden, which provides privacy from neighboring properties, in this case with a landscaping buffer, and provides security with limited access points. If we jump on the next slide. And this is another example demonstrating the same considerations, except there are 4 units and the configuration is slightly different. It is up to respondents to detail the proposed configuration of the core and cluster facility and to what extent it meets the functional design specifications and key considerations I mentioned before, such as privacy, security, accessibility, shared spaces, and so forth. The next slide. So this diagram depicts what's the functional design brief sets out as kind of an ideal layout for independent living quarters. You can see that each unit has its own kitchen, laundry, and indoor living and outdoor areas. Responses don't have to be exact to this particular diagram. Again, this is an example of what an ideal facility might look like. Innovation and flexibility is encouraged. An example here is the dual key access point at the top of the diagram that allows the unit on the left to access an additional room from the unit on the right, which might allow larger families to be accommodated when necessary. So it's really, that functionality of being able to accommodate a single woman, but then in another circumstances, a larger family as well. So we're really putting it up to respondents to refer back to the functional design brief and develop an innovative design that meets as closely as possible the design specifications. Again, noting that it's obviously going to have to align with any council planning regulations and things like that. So this is an illustration of what the core building in the facility might ideally look like. There are communal indoor areas, children's play space, kitchen and dining area, also conference meeting rooms and office space for on-site staff. The physical core is where the services and supports can be accessed, is ideally within the core and cluster facility, if not very near to it. And then just on to figure 15. So this figure highlights the residential types assessed as being best suited for core and cluster facilities. we want proposals that detail which type it is. If the proposed facility doesn't fit into these types, we're asking respondents to detail to what extent they believe the core and cluster asset designs will be met. Again, we won't go into detail and highlight, but highlights a high-level extract of the information that's contained within the functional design brief. But you can see we're looking at sort of multi-dwelling housing, dual occupancy, manor house style properties, or residential low-rise. We've talked about, I'm not sure if it's in these slides, but we've had some questions about like how many dwellings we're looking at. And obviously we haven't set a specific, each core and cluster facility is going to have 4 independent units or 8 independent units. The functional design brief refers to 6 independent units in the cluster as kind of being an ideal model, but each proposal will have to respond to local circumstances, the space available, the local demand and things like that. So we're not specifying that each core and cluster refuge is going to have 6 units, but that is what's noted in the functional design brief as kind of being an ideal measure. Gives you an idea of the sort of size of these facilities that we're looking at. So as I've noted, the core also refers to the wraparound services that are attached to the proposed facility. So we want proposals to outline how the services and supports align with the specialist homelessness service specifications and domestic family violence support services. I'll just speak to this a little bit in the next slide. This is probably less detail for sort of less relevant for local councils, but just to give you an information about the sorts of services that we're looking to have offered as part of this, part of these new refuges. So proponent should address the components listed on the slide together with the proposed staffing structure to support it. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into detail, but you can see that the sort of key components of a domestic and family violence service that we're looking at delivering as part of this program includes the direct case management, support tailored to meet the needs of the different target groups. It could be Aboriginal women and children from CALD backgrounds, LGBTQI women and young women. Indirect support, which is providers working to assist people escaping DFE and experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. Supported crisis accommodation, child-centered support, person-centered and trauma-informed approaches, and post-crisis supports and follow-ups. This came up later, but I have already covered this, so we'll just skip over. But very quickly, as mentioned, the functional design brief refers to 6 self-contained units as being the ideal specification. However, proposals for facilities of fewer than 6 independent units will be considered. And we've asked the responses to detail, their information about local demand and how they're meeting that local demand. So, finally, how can councils be involved? Well, there's a few things. So DCJ has developed a process for parties to register interest to connect with potential partners. This could include service providers requiring a partner to deliver on the 4 components of the core and cluster program, or parties interested in being approached to partner in core and cluster delivery. This could include local councils, landholders, or construction companies listing their interest to partner with suitable service providers. There may be local councils who believe they have access to land, who may be interested in a core and cluster facility and being built within their council. So you may look to be able to make land available to community housing providers or specialist homelessness services who might want to access that land or asset. Obviously, councils are also going to be involved in the assessment process for any proposals that require local approvals. It could be a change of use development application, or if the proposal requires a new build or refurbishment, there obviously could be proposals that will be coming to local governments as well. So there are various opportunities. As I mentioned, tranches 1 and 2, tranche 1 has closed for expressions of interest and for requests for tender. Tranche 2 is recently closed for expressions of interest and is opening today for requests for tender. And then there will be a third tranche that will be opening early in 2023 as well. We are looking at core and cluster facilities being delivered across New South Wales. We'll provide information to the web link that we have for the New South Wales Government's core and cluster site. That does also include an indicative distribution of where we're looking to deliver these new refuges, but we haven't specified that we want them, there's the web link. We haven't specified that we want it delivered in a particular town, or it's a sort of high level distribution. We are looking for respondents to come back with proposals of where they think the local demand is and where they want to see, where they think they can deliver core and cluster facilities, and we'll assess that as against that sort of high level distribution. So I've listed, as I said, the webpage has a lot more detail about the what I presented, including the process to register for the register of interest to connect with potential partners. I know it's a long web address, so rather than copying it all down, you can easily find the website by typing DCJ Core and Cluster into Google search, but we'll also we'll circulate the link, I think, to attendees as well. So thank you everyone for your time. That's my presentation, and I'll hand back to Homelessness New South Wales now.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That's greatly appreciated. And I can see that we've had a few questions come in through the chat, which we will get to in a moment. My name is Eloise. I'm the Industry Capacity Manager working on the Capacity and Capability Building Program for the sector for Core and Cluster. I'm also coming from Gadigal land today and would like to acknowledge Elders past, present and future. So what we would like to do is really have this as a starting point of our partnership with local government and local councils. We want to take up on this opportunity to continue this conversation and to encourage it to be a two-way conversation. So the first way that we'd like to do that is for all the participants today to fill in a survey. That survey will give us an idea of what more information you may be seeking, but also if you have a key contact in your local councils that can support the sector with Core and Cluster. You also see that we have our email address there. Please do reach out to us. As I said, we're really wanting to make this a two-way conversation and wanting to hear from you and wanting to, I guess, make this the start of our partnership and the start of our opportunity to work together. So those are the best ways, the survey and reaching out to Homelessness New South Wales. And we will also be circulating the slide deck and all the information that has been shared today to attendees. And the webinar is also recorded for your future reference and to circulate with your colleagues. But I think now we're going to jump to questions. So we've had a couple of questions, mostly for you, Matt, but I'll just read them out. And if any of our panelists have any thoughts and feedback, please do jump in. So one of the questions, which I think you briefly touched on, Matthew, was can local governments gain a list of which services in their area have applied and or been successful in gaining Core and Cluster funding?
Thanks, Eloise. I should also acknowledge we have, I'm not sure if introductions, but we also have Lisa Sampson on the call as well from the Aboriginal Community Housing Industry Association. So if any councils have any questions around what community housing providers might be looking at in sort of requiring in terms of the actual organisations that will be submitting development applications or change of use DAs, things like that, obviously I encourage people to reach out to Lisa as well. But so in terms of a list, we are in a procurement process, and I am bound by probity guidelines at this stage. We will be making information around successful core and cluster tenderers available as soon as we can. But at the moment, I can't disclose for probity reasons who's been successful at this stage yet.
Thanks, Matt. The next question is, what about councils who only do 5-year leases? Leases are renewed on an ongoing basis every 5 years, but longer terms aren't allowed due to updated lease terms and agreements.
Yeah, look, we are looking as part of this program around being able different ways of achieving sort of long-term security and tenure over site. So it'd probably have to be assessed on a case-by-case basis whether there are opportunities for registrations on titles and things like that we could have to have some assurance that the facility was going to be utilised as a core and cluster refuge for long-term, particularly where funding's being made available for refurbishment and things like that.
These are a question is saying that these will be quite expensive to deliver. Have there been any estimates?
Yeah, so They will be. We've obviously, as I mentioned, it's a record investment to deliver these new refuges. Certainly, there was a very extensive business case process prior to the announcement of funding that was gone through to determine the funding requirements. But obviously, that's for New South Wales government to look at the budget for this program and try and deliver as the targets that we have for the expansion. It's through our estimates, it represents almost a double. The investment is intended to deliver an almost doubling of the number of women's crisis refuges currently in operation in New South Wales.
And another question, I'm just going to read it verbatim. This program is assuming councils have land and assets that can be given away. If we did, then we would have already done so years ago, considering the need has been long term. What about council areas with the community need but require a return, reasonable and in negotiation with providers, and or do not have land available fit for purpose?
So just to be clear, we're not working on the assumption that land needs to be given away. Funding is available through this program for the purchase of land or assets and construction costs associated with that. So if council's looking to partner and has some land, then you could look at a proposal which would involve the purchase of that land, maybe the divestment of that land to a community housing provider. In other circumstances, obviously, there are other organisations with land. Some of the proposals involve purchase of land on the private market. Some community housing providers have access to existing land. So we're not just looking at this program only being delivered on local government land. It's just if there are local governments who may have land that they're seeking to make available, then there are opportunities there. But the program is not expected to be relying on local government land. Do recognise that it's a very tight market at the moment, and so there are a variety of ways in which the land can be provided, and that includes some proposals which are proposing to make access of New South Wales government land as well. So, for example, partnerships with the Land and Housing Corporation for redevelopment of Land and Housing Corporation land into core and cluster refuges as well. So there's a range of options for service providers to be able to access land for this program.
Thank you. And last question we have here, and then maybe Lisa, it would be great if you can speak more to what ACCO is doing in this space. We've got another question as well. We'll do both. This question is a lot of questions in one. So how are applications made to council? Is an application made to any council as a core and cluster development application? Will the DAs be fast-tracked? And who's expected to prepare the DAs?
Yeah, so the DAs would be prepared by the proponent who's seeking funding. We're providing funding to proponents to deliver the new refuges. So those applications would be coming to council from the proponents, and there may be examples where they would need to apply for a development application through the local council.
Thank you. And Lisa, do you want to speak to a bit of what ACCO is doing while few more questions come in and people have time to think?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that, Eloise. Thank you, Matt, for that presentation. Coming to you, my name's Lisa Sampson. I'm the CEO of the Aboriginal Community Housing Industry Association. We're the peak body for Aboriginal community housing providers across New South Wales, and I'm coming to you today from the beautiful lands of the Darug and Gandagara people right at the top of the Blue Mountains, where the sandstone curtain falls away to the Hartley Valley. So, look, what I wanted to share with you today is, of course, and I have worked with for local government myself before, so I'm very interested in the question around is local government being expected to provide land, and of course, don't you think we would have done this because there's been, this need has existed for quite some time. Absolutely and totally agree with that. And as Matt has said, we are not only looking to local government to see whether or not there may be land that could be contributed to this initiative, but also to Land and Housing Corporation at the state level, but also bearing in mind that there are many local Aboriginal land councils or prescribed body corporates and Aboriginal corporations that own plots of land throughout New South Wales, given that there has been a fantastic target set by the New South Wales government in line with closing the gap, that 21 out of the core and cluster refuges that are going to be funded are going to be Aboriginal led and delivered. There's a real opportunity for local government to partner with Aboriginal community housing providers to look at, well, if there needs to be rezoning, for example, and DAs need to take those types of things into account. These are the kinds of questions that we would encourage for you to unpack in a collaborative way with Aboriginal community housing providers, because there are land assets that need to be realised, and these are things that Aboriginal community housing providers can possibly do with your assistance. Even if it's not land assets, we're looking at say community housing providers in general, not just Aboriginal community housing providers, looking at potentially purchasing sites, say low-rise unit buildings or manor houses, particularly in regional areas. Now, how can those facilities be retrofitted to, and what will reasonable use actually mean? Those are the kinds of things that potentially, the kind of language that you as planners speak every day in with architects, designers, with developers in your regions. You're very geared up to be able to almost perform a translation or a bridge between these service providers who are very, very good at what it is that they do, but potentially will need more collaboration from you to be able to design and decide what the development applications will need to entail before they lodge them with council. I know that many councils offer things like an on the desk 2 hours free every Monday to Friday morning for people to come in and just have a chat about the kinds of challenges they're facing with their development applications or the potential development applications they need to lodge. If those are the kinds of things that you could possibly think about in each of your local government areas in terms of, can we make these kinds of sessions available specifically for core and cluster applicants in our local area? You mightn't want to provide them, broadly to every constituent, but particularly if they are to assist core and cluster applicants. Those are the kinds of things that you can look at doing, and CHIA New South Wales, as an example, as a peak body, could partner with you in trying to gather smaller groups within your area to potentially smooth the way, as it were, whether it's looking at reusing or retrofitting existing buildings, or whether that's looking at land to be realised, whether that it sort of brings in zoning issues or other kinds of issues that you as planners know so well, given that your everyday remits.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lisa. And please do keep the questions coming. We've had 2 more questions. Someone is keen to understand, Matt, directed towards you, is keen to understand if DCJ, Land Council, Crown is offering land assets, maintenance, etc. as part of this initiative. If the case, can that please be provided to services?
So we're not specifically offering land for development. We're looking at proponents to reach out to Land and Housing Corporation or other New South Wales government bodies, and we have provided contact details to do so, but we're not identifying specific plots of land that we're saying this is where we want to deliver a new refuge. We're looking at for proposals to come back to us with proposals for where they would deliver a refuge, how they would secure access, and then we're providing the funding for the land and the asset.
And the last question, by the looks of it, has the Department of Planning been asked to help with accessing the planning portal? That's a huge impediment for councils and the public.
I might have to take that question on notice and do another follow-up with my Department of Planning colleagues. So we have reached out and had some conversations with Department of Planning, but I might take that one on notice and do another follow-up about that.
Thank you so much. We will be circulating the response to that to all attendees after the webinar. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any further questions. So I just wanted to hand over to our panelists if there was anything further that you would like to add before we wrap up.
Sorry, it's Daria. Just to say that, you know, this is really such an important process, and, you know, for local governments, it could be just one little thing where we make it easy for the applicant. And I think all of local government want to see the best services for their community. And, you know, for families that are affected by family and domestic violence, you know, if we could just make it easier, I think it would be a great opportunity. And, you know, I hope that councils consider it in every way. And certainly, you know, if local government New South Wales can help, I know that our staff will be there to provide advice and support.
Well, thank you.
So I think Lisa's got a hand up, and then yeah.
Oh, Lisa.
Lisa, you want to jump in, and then I might just say something as well.
Thanks for that, Matt. Just want to echo what Councillor Turley has said. There are ways that we need to work together, and your expertise as planners, as experts in local government, and how you work with the numerous stakeholders that affect our everyday lives. Because let's face it, local government is a level of government that most affects every Australian's everyday lives. These are the opportunities that we are hoping that you will see that could potentially be brought to us as stakeholders in the program, so that we can widen, we can wedge open that door to make sure that that women and their children who are leaving domestic and family violence can find a safer way, not only in the short term, but also in the longer term, because this is what this feeder program essentially does. It offers safety in the short term, and of course, better options for a safer and productive life in the longer term. So your feedback and your expertise is very much required.
Thanks, Lisa. And Eloise, before you jump off, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's taken the time to join us today. As I mentioned, I think this is this program is a huge investment. It touches on a lot of stakeholders. And I just wanted to say I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to working with my colleagues in the service sector, in the community housing sector, and across local government to deliver what I think is a really great opportunity to provide some really vital supports in an extremely needed space. So again, thank you to everyone for your time today.
Yes, and I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists for your time today. It has been fantastic to start this collaboration together, and we look forward to continuing it over the next couple of years. As I mentioned earlier, please do complete the survey on your screen, reach out to the email address that Matt provided that we will be sending out, as well as our Homelessness New South Wales email with any questions after this webinar. And yes, thank you all for your time today for joining this. There will be a recording available afterwards. But yes, thank you and have a good day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.